Welcome to the IMM Friday Flash Talk, anchored by Govin Whittles.
The reason why that responsibility was taken away from the Hawks is not yet known.
With marketing enthusiast Tarasai Moffat.
To have a return on sales, you need to have posts that are going to be engaging.
The IMM Institute's Friday Flash Talk. Good morning and welcome to another installment of the IMM Institute's Friday Flash Talk. My name is Govin Whittles. I'm your host, and with me is Tarasai Moffat, MD of Gateway Synergy, our resident marketing guru. This is the platform where we hope to bring you insightful views on the latest marketing trends and guests who are engaged in helping move the industry forward. We hope that you'll be able to share the conversation and engage with us on social media, on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, even Instagram Reels, if you're into making those. But we're really happy that we're able to bring to you special guests who every month are able to dissect the latest news in the world of marketing. And today is no different. With us, we have Mpumi Zondi from Edelman, South Africa. And he's here to talk about how donations help great brands grow. Mpumi, it's such a pleasure to have you with us. It's over to you, and tell us exactly what you mean when you say donations could help brands.
Thank you, Govin. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here. Happy Friday, everybody. So this is actually some thinking that I had shared recently with an NGO client. It's very interesting. In Africa, NGOs and development agencies are massive. And there's a lot of activity around there. There's a lot of investment around there, right? So I really put this together to have a chat with one of our clients, really trying to help them think about how they think about their brand, specifically in the NGO space. But again, I just want to make it very clear that this applies to any brand, right? What we've really found is that with a lot of these kind of large NGOs, especially the international ones, local ones as well, there is a lot of kind of understanding of the function of the service or the work, the important work that they do. But there's very kind of little understanding or nuance around understanding how they build their brand, right? And that's really kind of why I had put this together. It's really a very kind of simple overview of kind of how I think about the principles of marketing and branding. I do quite a lot of these. So I always try to kind of come up with the fresh approach to kind of how I share some of these insights. So this one was quite unique. What I really did is, I'm a huge reader. I love what I do. I'm fascinated by the industry. I'm always studying it. So what I really did is I took 10 books that have kind of guided my thinking over the years, and I've used the 10 books to showcase 10 insights of how you could think about building your brand. So I'm hoping everybody enjoys it. But at least if you kind of think this Mpumi guy is not interesting, you're going to get a really, really good reading list. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's always valuable to have some insights narrowed down into a stream of thinking that's useful for a brand. And Mpumi, before I asked Tarasai for her views, listen, donations and brands, right, are not a link that most people make.
I know, that's why I use it.
just explain to me what the link is.
Well, again, that's what I'm saying is that it was mainly tailored for an NGO, but it really begins to start thinking around the idea that, like, part of the insights that I kind of share in the book is this concept of called jobs to be done theory, right? It really starts to look at this idea that when someone buys your product or service, really what they're doing is hiring it to do a specific job, right? So understanding what that job is quite critical to being successful in either selling the product, positioning the product, or building the brand, right? So really this whole idea of, because this presentation was really designed around NGOs, that the donation story was relevant. But I think, again, as I'm saying, the insights are are generic and relevant to products and services. So however you want to look at how the brand earns its living, either through, you know, buying and pricing, either through donations, or either through investment, it kind of really covers everything. But it was meant to be a bit provocative, and that's really the point. You know, us marketers, right? You're always trying to stand out and be memorable.
Yeah.
Right.
Teresa, you know, on the African continent, some of the biggest brands are NGOs.
Yeah.
You know, people think of them as companies, but they're brands too. In South Africa, well, I suppose we'll be mentioning a bunch of NGOs, so I'll just start. One of the biggest brands in South Africa is Gift of the Givers, right?
Yeah.
And people sometimes forget that they are an NGO, but they've built their brand, which is based on donations, to have such an appealing marketing value, and yet they don't launch any campaigns, which is, I guess their work is their campaign. What do you think, Teresa?
So when I was going through Mpumi's presentation, I was quite intrigued by the concept of having a massive transformative process, which is what he speaks of in his deck. And this massive transformative purpose is when brands go beyond just being a brand. And he uses examples like Tesla, and I'm hoping he's going to get more into his deck, and how their mission, or as Google, their mission is to transform the world, and that ties into their business value, their business processes, their business systems. It becomes their identity. So even with Gift of the Givers, in as much as, you know, they are an NGO, their whole mission, their purpose is to give back. So they are so central in how they conduct their business that when you partner with them, you are clear about their mission, their values, their strategic purpose. And it's just how, as brands, do you make sure that in all your communication, in all your positioning, in all your basically the heartbeat of your organization, is it something that is massively transforming the communities, the society, so that it can have a lasting impact for generations to come, so to speak?
Yeah, and I just want to jump in on that as well. I think for me, really the really powerful thing about this kind of MTP offering, right, is one of the reasons I also tapped into it is that I believe that NGOs actually are uniquely positioned because their mission is actually quite critical. It's like, it's important work. They're not, you know what I mean? They are saving lives and providing healthcare and providing water and providing necessary life-saving, life-changing kind of services. And so for me, it feels like, it almost feels like, for me, NGOs have a naturally built-in MTP, right? Like, to literally change the world, right? And the reason, that I really kind of want to touch on this MTP part of the story is it feels so natural from an NGO point of view, right? But I think when we look at the commercial clients, for example, it's really starting to challenge them to kind of move beyond kind of like the corporate statement or the kind of mission statement. There's a lot of us who have kind of those corporate statements that are printed on the walls of the companies that we work for, but you walk past it and it doesn't really do anything for you. Sometimes it just ends up feeling like wallpaper, right? And I think when you look at
the bottom line,
because
the
of the
bottom line is stronger
right.
than the corporate statement. And look, this is a great conversation because you say that there are 266,000 NGOs in South Africa. So if anything, it's a great base to study.
Yeah.
Right? To study behavior, and it can give you definitive trends. But the main question that arises for marketers is that, is there a separate marketing strategy built for the NGO space, which is focused on them having work and fulfilling their mission at the core to get the donations, compared to a brand which is selling a product?
No, it's the same thing. It's the same structure. It's the same flow. It activates slightly differently, right? But it's really the same thing. And I think for me, that's kind of like the critical point, right? maybe, let's get the presentation ready, because I feel like I'm getting into it without giving context. So I want to kind of give the flow of context, and then we can go deeper. But, for me, more than anything now, what we are seeing is we live in a world of technological advancements. Products and services are actually becoming more and more similar, right? It's very rare that you find a service that is drastically different to everything else in the marketplace. What becomes drastically different is the positioning and the value that that brand holds in someone's mind, right? And that's really the main differentiator. At Edelman, we look at, kind of how trust is built from a brand point of view. We look at 3 silos. We look at what we call product function, which is, does a brand do what it does, what it says it does, which is, it's the ticket to the game. If your brand doesn't do what it says it does, then, shouldn't really be in business, right? So, and then you kind of go to the next phase, which looks at, does your product reflect the culture in which it operates in, right? And then the third case, which is if you're able to do all 3, trust is built, is, does your product positively impact or change society for the good, right? And if you're able to do those 3 things, the commercial viability and trust that comes with that is quite powerful, right? I think for me, really, the challenges that we face is that there's certain aspects of brand building that are very kind of hard to link directly to return on investment, right? But there's been work that's been done. And I remember reading a while ago that, now that Apple actually has got a value for its brand equity. So if Apple would have been sold, it would be the value of the business plus the brand equity that comes with Apple. They found a way to actually.
How do they quantify that?
It's super complex, right? That's a whole other conversation. But it really starts to look at, they now understand that the value of that brand actually has a monetary value as well, which adds to the equity of the brand, which means that if you sold it, you have to take all of that into account, right? It's probably why it was the first $1 trillion company in history, right? So it's really us starting to get the whole organization understanding that the value of your brand isn't just the sales at which it actually gets. It's the real estate that it holds in someone's mind, and the bigger the real estate that you hold in someone's mind, the bigger the potential for you to earn more.
Which is the real estate in someone's mind is the primary currency of NGOs.
Yeah. Yep.
That's exactly how they do how they get their name out there. Terasai, do you think that what's interesting about this is that looking at NGOs from a marketing perspective, from in the sector in South Africa and on the continent, are people taking the opportunity to market NGOs seriously, Terasai?
So it's a bit tricky because in one regard, most companies have their own CSR department. So they're already doing some form of work in terms of corporate social responsibility. And it's to say, do we, for example, let me give the KFC Ad Hope Foundation as an example, right? They collect the R2 and that goes to feeding the children. That's already a whole CSR campaign that they have owned as their own brand and said, we are going to feed the nation in sales, and we're going to feed the nation in terms of the less disadvantaged, etc., within the community. So they have taken that approach. So would they then stand out and market another NGO when they already have an existing pipeline of their own NGO that they have inherently built within their organization? And this speaks to a lot of brands in the sense that they have their own CSR department. So would they consider marketing additional NGOs if it's not in alignment with their current initiatives and projects?
And how attractive, Terasai, is an NGO as a client to a marketing firm who has, say, for instance, let's say out of 10, right? You got your brands. Out of 10, how many of your clients would be NGOs, or would they even approach them to represent NGOs?
You've got to understand that there's the donations. Let's just say, for example, this is published. The Melinda Gates Foundation recently worked with Ogilvy, I think, on a almost 4 billion rand campaign. I'm not sure if it's dollars or rands. I stand to be corrected. And this was for Forever Winner, which was a PrEP campaign to educate young adults on how to use PrEP, which is a preventative measure post or before sexual contact. So in other words, encouraging the youth and the young adults to take ownership and responsibility for their sexual health. And they've created websites, they've partnered with celebrities, they've done road shows, there's education, WhatsApp bots, everything that has been created around the education with sexual health and taking ownership for your health. That is a campaign that has great value in education, but also you can see the monetary value that has been put into it. So to say that an NGO traditionally doesn't have budget would be a false statement, because that is probably a bigger budget than most other clients have for their rollout executions and campaigns.
I mean, that's huge, but we're not surprised by that foundation's contribution because they do so much work, especially on the continent. Mpumi, is that kind of campaign a game changer for how marketing firms look at NGOs as clients, or has that been the trend?
No, absolutely. So I think for me, again, and just to add to Tara's point, because we're in Africa, right? What we do know is that there is a lot of, and again, there's different levels. There's going to be NGOs, there's going to be nonprofits, there's going to be development agencies, which in Africa are massive because you got global governments working with local governments to have impact work on the ground, right? So it's definitely a massive scale in terms of difference. Is it different? Is it different in terms of from an agency point of view? I think so. I think, again, it depends on how we look at it, in the sense that it's going to go back to how, from a consumer point of view, we look at the difference between, an NGO and a for-profit business. I do think that there's certain projects from an agency point of view when it comes to NGOs that are passion work. You're doing meaningful things, life-changing type work, which carries its own value for the people who are working on the business. So I do think that striking a balance in between the two is important. But I also do believe that because of the content in which we operate in, the opportunities from a developmental point of view, development agencies have massive funding. I remember speaking to a colleague in I think it was Kenya at the time, but we were talking about kind of which are the biggest spenders on the African continent, and surprisingly, it's NGOs and development global agencies than multinational, right? Again, it makes sense because there's a lot of aid that comes in on the continent. So financially, on this and on the continent, it is a massive opportunity, right? And very, very important kind of life-changing work.
And sometimes they're bigger brands, right?
Yeah.
What's your opinion of how the brands conducted themselves, the NPO, NGO, developmental agency brands?
Look, I think again, depending on which level it's coming from, Melinda Gates Foundation, I mean, it's the largest in the world. I think last I checked, which was 5 years ago, they were a $60 billion enterprise, right? So that's a lot of influence and power, right? And I do think that if you look at some of the work that they do, the intentions are incredibly good and very important in terms of changing lives on the ground, right? Because of the scale that they have, they can make a difference. In some cases, a bigger difference than some of the governments can, just because of the financial power. So I do think that they do conduct themselves incredibly well. There are some that do very, very well. If you look at some of the trust stuff that we've shared with you guys previously, when you look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, for example, where we study the four kind of industries from a trust point of view, business, governments, NGOs, and media, right? When it comes to the most trusted, on the African continent, the two most trusted is NGOs and business, right? And government sits at the bottom and media follows, right? So when you look at that, what that says is that the public on the continent believes that business and NGOs will make the biggest impact in their lives over government and media, right? So think about the weight that carries, right? Think about again, that real estate that I talk about, that people on the ground in Africa believe that these organizations can actually add more value to their lives than their own governments and their own media, right?
When you're developing a campaign as an agency for a for-profit brand, it's usually a balance between making sure that your campaign achieves the return on investment in terms of sales of the product, right?
Yep.
But also solidifies the perception of the brand,
Yep.
or furthers it to whichever direction they're going. So when you develop a campaign for a not-for-profit or an NGO, do you approach the intention to secure a donation in the same way as you would approach the intention to make a sale from the product?
It depends. So on some NGOs already have money, right? Especially when you talk about development agencies, right? So they come in to make a difference. So there, what you are really doing is communicating the work that they're doing on the ground. What are they bringing in? What difference they're making on the ground, right? So that is more of a positioning job. It's an awareness job. It's a job to kind of position the good work that they do on the ground. Some projects are about raising awareness so that you can actually get donations, right? It just depends on what the objectives of.
But you know, most marketers, their agencies are not representing the big developmental funds or the big foundations. And we have hundreds of thousands of NGOs here in South Africa, right, Tarasai? So I mean, they might be very aware that they're coming in to get money into this NGO.
Yeah.
Does that sound like a daunting task, Tarasai, or something that you may think twice about doing and just going with a traditional brand where it's easier to sell a product?
I think it depends with the agency. You know, are you an agency that wants to do creative that matters? Or are you an agency that just wants to slap on a few graphics and then that's it? Campaign is done, campaign is sold. So I think it really has to do with, you know, creative that matters. And I think a lot of marketers, creative agencies, creative directors, the heart is coming back into a lot of people and they really want to do work that matters. You know, in some of the meetings you'll sit in and you can feel the passion that the directors have for the project that they're working on because it's creative that matters. So even if you look at some of the awards that are being won at the Loeries or at the Cannes, etc., it's all got to do with campaigns that matter. So I think in that regard, the industry is changing, the mindset is changing, and the values are changing as well.
And again, I think just to add to that, you can, again, it depends on kind of the positioning and the work that the organization does, right? So if you look at things like Prosper Africa, for example, which is an American initiative, you know, so doing work on the continent, you know, it's very much around empowerment, very kind of heavy purposeful work, pretty serious in its tone, right? But you look at something like Global Citizen that brings in superstars to do a concert to raise money. It's a very different, requires a very different marketing plan. You might find with Global Citizen, because of just the sheer power of the celebrities that they have, you know, the brand has already a strong positioning. It is a concert. It is a celebratory, feel good, kind of joyous campaign more than it is around, you know, trying to do very kind of serious, impactful work on the ground. Again, it just depends on the positioning, the tone, and that kind of guides and the kind of approach that you would have with that.
Mpumi, how difficult is it to balance the intent to make a difference with securing the objective of a return on investment for the campaign?
I think the whole point for me is that everything must be to make a difference. I think if you make enough of a difference, the donations would follow. And I think that's also kind of where, you know, from a title point of view, it kind of comes from, right? I think that for me, the reality of, and it's kind of what we miss sometimes with comms, is that we have this tendency to think that there's all these separate things that happened. You know, this thing you do because it makes people feel good, therefore it has no financial value. Yes, it does, right? Because this thing makes people, feel proud and creates emotions of belonging, it does a different job. Well, if it does that job well, the money will come. Do you understand what I mean?
But you kind of have to trust that the money will come. And when you're sitting in the meeting, right, Teresa? So you're sitting in the meeting with the agency, and you're telling them like, no, let's do this good thing.
Yeah.
I'm telling you that people will like us for it, and the money will come. And then how do they respond, Teresa? They're like, we believe you.
I'll let Mpumi answer that one.
You know what? Again, I think, I tell my team this all the time, also because, they can get quite, it can be quite daunting to like try and sell something and it gets rejected, right? But if you study innovators, right, people who change the world are always rejected. That's the ticket to the game, right? If Airbnb has a story of how many investor rejections that they've experienced. Everyone who was innovating has a story about how many times someone said no, right? But that's the point. If your goal is to do things differently to how it's usually being done, the initial response is going to be a no, because there's no proof point for it, right? And I think that for me, if marketing and creative and advertising were these perfect solutions, like if I do this, it's gonna work, then I'll be a gazillionaire, right? Yeah. Right? The whole point is to go based on what we understand about the market, based on what we understand about the consumer, based on what we understand about your objectives. We think that this will give you the outcome you're looking for based on our previous experience, right?
But that's formula talk.
Yeah, but some things
suggest that there are formulas.
Yeah, so some things, yeah. But again, to add to that, I talk a lot to my clients now about experimentation budgets, right? Things are changing so fast right now that everything that we knew worked is not working anymore, right? So how do you know what is the next thing that's going to work? You have to try and experiment with different things. Some campaigns should be designed to learn rather than to have a financial outcome. It has to be.
How do they respond to the concept of an experimentation budget?
It's always a tough one. So it's always around trying to. For me, I always go, give me the smallest budget you have. The easiest way to track it would probably be on digital and social media. So let's do it there. But the truth of the matter right now is that the most innovative companies are experimenting all the time. Right, the top digital companies in the world, the Facebooks, all of them, they're running experiments 24/7, right? Because
with massive budgets, though. And I'm just Teresa, I mean, like, what do you think of that concept of an experimentation budget where the goal is not to get an ROI, but to learn?
Well, I think it's a good one. I actually quite like it, to be honest. Something that I might start using quite frequently. I really like it, actually. But I know that marketers are always fearful. They're always fearful. They'll always go back to history. They'll think about the H&M campaign and how their stores got looted and how it was culturally insensitive and all of that. And there's always the fears that what if I experiment and then we get a lot of backlash. It hasn't been tried and tested long enough to make sure that it's culturally sensitive. We've used the right matrix, all of that. We have sufficient reach. So there's always those fears. So it has to really do with trust, which is something that Mpumi's organization focuses on a lot. So it's trusting them to say, okay, we really trust you. And that comes through years of experience. I don't know about experimenting with a smaller agency and experimenting with a trusted agency. There's always things to think about behind that.
I think there's a thing that's again quite fascinating for me in terms of how the world is changing, right? So, most of my career of like 16, 17 years was in advertising, right? And I think traditionally, how we think about this, and this is kind of my response to the clients when they raise what Teresa is raising, which is very relevant, right? We come from a world where we created an advert, we bought space and we placed it, right? And then you kind of waited, right? We now live in a world where if you create something and you place it, someone will say something immediately, right? And we're not used to that conversation. So for me, the way I look at it is to go, there's one of my favorite books is Marketing Revolution, The Most Human Company Wins, right? And it really starts to tap in this whole idea that, like, if you make a mistake, if you're known to be quite a human company, you know, kind of like very authentic, and very, look at Patagonia, right? And kind of very open, very open to learn. When you make a mistake, your audience will understand. When you make a mistake, your audience would forgive you. But if you are this kind of functional, transactional company, you know what I mean? People will come after you. But we live in a world where you as a company can respond. This is also what's kind of weird, is that clients are very afraid of the idea that, like, the whole point now to content is conversation. It's not this one-sided thing I published and then you liked it, and then you know what I mean. It's this idea. It's critically important. In the world of marketing and advertising, the command and control business is gone. This whole idea that I control the campaign and that I command the communication, it's gone, right? Mark Schumer talks about the idea that three-thirds of your marketing is not controlled by you; it's controlled by your audience, right? So this idea of learning to let go and actually have your audience as part of your marketing is a very new concept for marketers to think of, because it's this idea. I used to talk about this idea in PR where I go, our job is to start fires, right? In order for you to start a fire, you need the right market conditions. You light the fire, but if the grass is not dry, it's not gonna grow. If the wind is not blowing in the right direction, it's not gonna grow, right? So the job for us really right now is to place a piece of communication in the marketplace that's incomplete. Why? Because you want your audience to engage, to complete the piece of communication. So this idea of putting out complete pieces of work is an old model. You start something, the market engage, you iterate, the market engage, you iterate, and you create something amazing, right? We were responsible for doing the KFC wedding, you know, that social media campaign that kind of blew up in South Africa with the couple. And I've been trying to kind of redo that campaign for a long time. The reason it worked is because it happened organically, and we were able to push it and drive it and harness it, right? And by the time the client got involved, it had already begun. But if you look at traditional comms, it's I have to produce this thing, the client approves it, and then I put it out, right? But understanding the social space, everything has to be organic. You put something out, the market interacts with it, you iterate based on what the market is saying, they interact back, you know what I mean? And then you create a conversation.
Is that something that you would apply across the board, whether it's brands or NGOs?
Yes. Yes. It's the evolution of our industry, right? It's for me, it's just, as I'm saying, the shift from command and control is happening, right? And really what we're seeing right now is that some of the best brand building and some of the best community building is taking a lesson from this idea of interaction, right? You know, as I'm saying, I think, you know, the old model of publish by the space is look, it's still very relevant. I'm not saying it is not, but I think what you're finding is the people who understand the power of engagement to build loyalty and following and community are the people that are winning, right? And that's across the board, right? You know, one of the books that I talk about in the presentation is Exponential Organizations, which was released in 2014, and the authors were looking at this idea of what they were saying. They were saying we're seeing an emergence of what we call an XO, which is an exponential organizations. And an exponential organization has this tendency to have extreme results. It's exponential. So it's 10x better growth than your competitors. It's 10x speed. So for example, how long do you think it took for YouTube to go from idea to being sold for $1 billion? What was that time period, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, to being sold for $1 billion, probably
Yep.
say about 2009, 2007. I'd say 5 years, maybe 6
Yeah.
years, 7 years.
Is that?
Yeah, about the same.
It was 18 months.
From 2009, dude.
18 months in terms of that shift between the idea itself and how it launched to actually being sold, right? And they're seeing this everywhere, right? If you look at the founder of Zappos, built I think 3 companies before he sold Zappos for $1 billion to Amazon, and that took him about a year. The other companies he sold over 6 months, right? So this exponential space is this idea that growth, when you apply an MTP, when you apply decentralized ways of working, when you apply technology, when you apply kind of this decentralized way of working, what you're able to do is see exponential financial growth. So if you look at the power of where AI is now, right? Realistically, ChatGPT is about a year old, right? Right. I mean, it launched.
Why you say yeah?
It's a year old. When did it launch? It launched beginning of last year, January.
No, is it that young?
It's that young.
It was like
Sam
2 years now. Feels
No.
like 2 years.
Less, right? Think about when it actually launched. I think it actually was launched last year, January. Sam Altman is a billionaire today, right?
You know what I'm getting from this is that firstly, I need to start coming up with better ideas for companies to sell them.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And then secondly, the world of business is not really what people think it is.
And this is a point to exponential organizations, right? They were the first to introduce the idea that we are going to see the first 3-man billion-dollar company.
What does that mean?
It means that we're going to see the first company that only has 3 employees that's going to be worth $1 billion. Sam Altman thinks it could even be 1 person because of AI.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
think about what that means.
Wow.
Think about this. Let's think about how long it took. Why am I going to forget her name now? One of the Kardashian sisters, the one who's got the cosmetics company, right?
Yeah, I can't help it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna so forget it now. But
Kylie Kendall, one of the 2.
Yeah, Kylie Jenner, right? Kylie Jenner basically achieved in about 5 to 10 years what it took L'Oreal to achieve in 50. Right?
Wow.
And I think she's got 7 employees full time, right? So think about what that means in terms of.
But she probably has like a really big marketing agency.
No, she doesn't. She doesn't because it's decentralized. This is the point. So if you look at, I'm going to jump a little bit. The success of TED, for example, is based on community and people. So the founder of TED created the concept. It was ideas to be the ideas that were spreading, right? But the power of TED is that the reason it worked is because people bought into the idea and they call him and say, I live in Germany. I want to run a TED event. Do you mind? And he's like, yep. I live in Johannesburg. I want to run a TED event. How do I become official and launch?
And his company has nothing to do with it. He does nothing.
No.
He just says it's okay.
Yes. So let's go back to that thing we spoke about earlier around 3/3 of your marketing is not done by your marketing department.
True.
Right? Because think about that, right? So this is kind of where this shift is happening when it comes to exponential thinking and exponential organizations, is that when you decentralize a thing and decisions don't always have to happen at head office, and you have other people going out there and doing the work for you, the scale at which you can reach. And by the way, you don't employ these people. They're not your employees. They're just people who love what you're trying to do. And they go out and they do it for you, right?
Do you create the culture of people doing those things for you through a marketing campaign?
No, you do it through an MTP. So if my MTP is SpaceX, which is we want to make humanity a multiplanetary species, right? People that buy into that. Think about if you're an engineer or you're a rocket scientist. Do you want to work for NASA or do you want to work for SpaceX? If NASA is trying to make human beings basically aliens, what's the most exciting vision for you? In my view, I think the SpaceX vision. Right?
Yeah.
Now, if you buy into that.
Okay, I think that you've set it up nicely, but this would be a good time for you to introduce the presentation. Because a lot of marketers are looking at this and thinking, okay, maybe it's not a necessarily tweaking a small part of the strategy, but turning the entire strategy on its head. So
Yeah.
let's get some context through the presentation, and maybe they'll start to feel a little less nervous.
Okay, cool. So really what I wanted to look at is, one of the first numbers that I wanted us to look at is this 266,000, right? And what that is that there are 266,000 registered NPOs in South Africa, right? And that's just South Africa. There's 54 countries on the continent. So imagine if you actually looked at that as an average across the board, right? The second number that I wanted us to look at was 10 million. 10 million is the estimated number of non-governmental organizations, NGOs worldwide, right? They're saying that if NGOs were a country, they would be the 5th largest economy in the world. 1 in 3 people actually donated to a charity in 2015, right? So you really have to look at the scale of this thing. And the reason that's important to look at is because then the question for me becomes, why does one person choose your doing good work over another? And that really becomes the critical question, right? So when I started to look at this presentation, I basically wanted to give it a little bit of a different slant, but I also wanted to share with the audience the insights and books that have kind of guided the way I think about strategy and about brand. And I took 10 different insights from 10 different books. And I'm kind of hoping that this helps. The first one is a talk that was given by Melinda Gates, specifically looking at NGOs. And the talk is called what nonprofits can learn from Coca-Cola. It's an old presentation, but I love it because it's still relevant. And in the presentation, she highlights a very kind of critical insight for me. She goes, one of the biggest mistakes that NGOs make is that we assume that because people need something, we don't have to make them want it. And that's a critical flaw, right? Because I provide water to, in a community that doesn't have, the assumption is that I don't actually have to sell that to them, right? And one of the examples she uses is the experience she had in India, where one of the great challenges with India was what they call kind of open toilets. It's open defecation, really, right? So which is there's actually no toiletry that was provided specifically in the rural areas. So, kind of people go outside. The challenge with that, it increases disease, it affects children. It's actually quite dangerous, right? So what one of the NGOs did was to say, okay, cool, we'll build people toilets. The assumption is, well, you need the toilet, so we'll build you one and people are going to use it. And what they found is that when they built them, people didn't use them. They actually used them for storage or for anything else except for what a toilet is supposed to be, right? And this was, puzzling to them until they realized that because people needed this thing, you still had to make having a toilet quite an attractive thing. So they actually realized that one of the big things within some of these communities was young men and getting married. So they actually recruited women to help them with this, and they ran these campaigns, which had headlines like, show us your loo before you woo, right? Or in India, it says rural villages say no toilets, no brides, right? So within that context, they actually made the toilet like, a manly thing to have. And they actually made it societally kind of relevant. And this is critical because they started realizing that because people need this thing, it doesn't mean that they're naturally gonna use it. There was a book I read 1 million years ago called Poor Economics. And in this book, they actually touch on Kenya and things like malaria nets, right? They found that when they gave them away for free, people didn't use them because they don't value it. So they actually realized that they actually had to get people to pay for it, because when you pay for something, you value it, and then you also value what it does for you. But if you get it for free, it doesn't feel like it's something that works, right? It's touching on that psychology. Because the reality is that there are many just causes out there. And I think this is the critical point, right? From an NGO point of view, everyone does important work. There's 10 million organizations doing life-changing work. Why is your life-changing work more important than someone else's? And this is a question that, most marketers have to ask about their own brands, right? Why is my service, more important and better than someone else's?
And that's kind of the hook that you can put your campaign on.
It actually goes to the hook.
Where you have to kind of sell something that people need. It
Yes,
seems
right?
counterintuitive,
Yeah,
um,
it
but
does seem kind
probably
of, but
requires a different kind of thinking, yeah?
not necessarily. It just it needs an awareness of. It goes back to kind of some of the things I talk about here as well. Is we have to recognize that we live in what's called the attention economy, right? The goal is attention. How many people do you think are vying for your audience's attention? Everybody. There's podcasts, there's Netflix, there's adverts, there is social media, there is books, there is training, there is the Food Network. Do you know what I mean? Like, we have
Yeah.
to understand that people's attentions are being solicited all the time. So sometimes it's not that people don't value or see the value in what you're doing. It's the fact that they're distracted by other things. So how do you get that attention? And the next insight I kind of tap into comes from the work by Brandon Kane. He wrote a fascinating book called Hook Point, How to Stand Out in a 3-Second World, right? And he really starts to talk about this idea that organizations and brand need hooks to actually survive on social media. And he released this article a while ago where he was kind of saying, I've been asked to advise, clients that come from what they assume are boring industries. Like you look at NGOs, like you probably look at like insurance or life cover. And his advice is always the same. He says, your industry is not boring. It just needs a hook point, right? And that's kind of really how we have to think about it. How do I break?
Most of the brands, right, Teresa, they would just look to hook their brand onto something that's current at the moment, and we call it riding the wave. But Teresa, are you seeing like people trying to create their own hook points, or just, I don't know if it's really a cop out to ride a wave?
I think there's a combination of both. Most companies still have their brand plans, which they plan the year before, and they just rolling it out, and this is our content calendar, and this is when we are going to post, and this is our schedule, and this is when we sign off, and this is first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. They've done it. It's been approved by Exco, so that's how it's going to roll, and that's how the execution is going to go. So that's how they normally are still working. And then there are some that will piggyback on certain things, the ones that are a little bit bolder, they will piggyback on it. But in some cases, it just falls flat on maybe a retweet, a repost, a reshare. It's not intentional. It's not strategic or directional in saying this is the direction that we're going to take. It's just oh, we liked it, oh, we tweeted it, oh, we reposted it. You'll look at that like Albany campaign and how it went so viral, and everyone thought, wow, this was going to be the next biggest ad or the next biggest campaign. And then it was kind of just a reshare, relike, kind of few donations here and there, and then that was it.
And then it backfired.
Yes, it did. It did. It actually did. So it's I don't think we are yet at that point where we're bold enough to be strategic in that regard. Obviously they're the highlights, the Nando's, they will always be at the forefront. Chicken Licken is also trying to be quite a lot at the forefront as well, but it's not every brand that can do that, or that is bold enough to do that.
Okay, so Mpumi, I see we're approaching our time. So why don't you go through the list of books so that for the benefit of the marketers who will wonder like where to get these insights from.
Okay, I'll go through it, but I want to add on this very, very quickly because it's quite a critical point. We call it moving at the speed of culture, right? And we're seeing critical examples of it now. One of the most successful marketers today, strangely enough, is Ryan Reynolds. Do you know that? Like, he's a billionaire. And he talks about, and this guy's an actor, but he's like innovating the industry. He talks about what he calls fast advertising, right? Which is his strategy is very simple for all of his brands. Is my brands are going to listen to what's happening in culture, and then we're going to tap into it as quickly as possible. So what they've created as part of their business plan is this ability to know what's happening in the marketplace, and then very much like Nando's, quickly create a response. But in many cases, they're actually creating services and products based on that. There was a recent campaign in Cannes where I think it was Heinz, I could be wrong, where there was a post. Taylor Swift has been launching brands forever. There was some post where Taylor Swift was with a friend, and someone in the picture was mixing ketchup and mayonnaise, and that kind of went viral. Heinz actually created a product overnight and launched it within a couple of hours as an actual product. They did a limited production of it and sold it, and it sold out immediately, right? So really starting to look at that idea. So again, I'll go back to exponential organizations. The reason that some of these companies can start doing that is because they're thinking like that. They're not centralized. So you actually pick up something, you activate the business to create something quickly, and you produce it for a short term. So again, this idea of these set one-year plans that are rigid become a problem because you can't move at the speed of culture when you do that. Right. And that becomes one of the great challenges, kind of our time from a marketing planning point of view, is how do you, I look at it for me like, how do you plan 60% of the time and allow for 40% of fluidity? Because you have to adapt to what's happening in the marketplace. So just to kind of touch on some of the books, I've got Exponential Organizations, which I think is an incredible book. The second one is the next one is called Competing Against Luck. It's a book by Christian Claytonson, who was the professor of strategy at Harvard Business School. It's brilliant. I was actually lucky enough to attend one of his courses about 2 years ago. He is known as the forefront and foremost thinker on how disruption and innovation works. And in the book, he introduces a concept called jobs to be done theory, which I kind of talked about earlier, which really starts to look at when a consumer buys a product or service, they're actually hiring to do a specific job. So the concept of jobs to be done is quite cool. I then touched on predictably irrational, which really starts to, Dan O'Reilly is probably at the forefront of this kind of behavioral economics in terms of understanding that human being decision making is actually completely irrational, right? So he really studies the forces that shape our decision making. There's a lot of people who make subconscious decisions when they buy. They're actually not rational. But if you ask them, like for example, this is a terrible example, someone who's gonna, let's say me, I'm now 44, I'm rich, I'm gonna go buy a Ferrari, right? No one is gonna openly admit that they're buying a Ferrari to showcase that they're now wealthy. No one would ever admit that, not even to themselves. There's gonna be a way that you're gonna rationalize it to your head that like, it's my dream car and I've always wanted it. But there's another hidden drive that we need to understand. So that understanding of that hidden drive is quite critical. Scott Harrison is an interesting guy where he actually runs an NGO called Charity Water, but he's fascinating. The reason I had him here is he then goes into the storytelling of understanding, like the hook itself isn't the charity water, it's his story, right? So he wrote this book first. His story is fascinating. He's this young American, I think was a club owner, club promoter. He's very wealthy. He's throwing parties. He's hanging out with celebrities. He's wealthy. And one day he wakes up after one of his binges of like, cocaine, alcohol, parties, and supermodels. And he's like, I'm not happy. Like, I'm not happy. And he was young, right? So I think he changed his life at about 32 years old. And he got onto a mercy ship, went into Africa, and it was like life changed. So he started this organization that builds wells in small communities in Africa. But the thing that's interesting about his story is that he hardly ever talks about the charity when he's being interviewed. What's interesting is his redemption story. It's this idea of, I mean, how many times do you hear of a young person who gives up partying, alcohol, and supermodels to go and build wells in Africa? Like, you don't hear the story. But I think what happened is that story is the hook, because there are a lot of people who know that they could be making a difference, right? I wish I could quit my job and go do something meaningful, but because I can't, I'm going to give this guy money to do it because I buy into what he believes in. The next one is called Belong to Brand. Mark Schaefer for me is probably one of my favorite writers when it comes to marketing. I don't really read marketing books anymore. I've been doing this for 23 years. It feels very familiar, but for some odd reason, he's got a very interesting way of starting to talk about it. He wrote a book called Belonging to Brand. Why community is the last great marketing strategy. He's pushing this idea that right now, the greatest marketing opportunity is building community. Not just eyeballs, not just following, not just viewership, but creating a place where people belong, and creating a business out of that. It is fascinating. And there's so many proof points of companies doing that incredibly well. There's so many proof points of creators and content creators and influencers doing that. We are seeing it in the influencer space, where I think the next business model, which is already happening, is eyeballs, community, commercialize, loyalty, right? And creators are doing that. I've kind of referenced the classic from Seth Godin, "All marketers are liars." It's classic. And for me, the thing I loved about this is that he introduces an idea that I've kind of dubbed, I call it the lighthouse concept. He basically says it's very rare that a marketer changes a consumer's decision mind about a product. He says the best a marketer can do is go out into the world and tell the world what they believe in. And the people that believe the same thing you do will follow you and they'll buy from you, right?
And you reckon that these books will change the marketer's entire approach? I gotta say,
Well,
we've had a
depending
lot
on
of speakers on here,
Yeah.
and this is probably the most comprehensive homework list that I've heard so far.
Like I said, you
and I can tell that it could possibly disrupt a lot of
Yeah.
campaigns.
Yeah. So look, the way I've done it is that I've taken each insight and then I've connected all the dots. The last one, this one actually is on my readings. I haven't gone through it yet, but I love the concept. But it starts to go into crowdfunding, right? I think one of the things that is not tapped into enough is crowdfunding. But think about this. Govin, I don't know if you love cars. I'm not a car person, but let's look at high end. Like if you want to buy the top end Ferrari, doesn't matter how rich you are, you can't just go in and buy it, right?
No, unless you can swipe for it.
No, you can't.
You can't swipe for it.
You know what you do now? You have to get onto a waiting list.
Oh, right. Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
LVMH.
I'm also not a car person.
LVMH does the same thing. You can't just buy the craziest, most unique Louis Vuitton. You have to get on the list, right? So this whole idea, but think about the business plan now. So as a Ferrari, I go out into my community because I know that there's a whole lot of Ferrari owners, and I say to them, I'm making the 2025 Ferrari, which is this, and it costs $1 zillion, right? The people in that community who want to buy it, doesn't matter how rich you are, you first have to get onto the list. Let's say you're going to make 50 of these, right? You get those people onto a list, you basically sell all the inventory before you build the car. So by the time you actually make the car, it's gone, it's sold. Like
the Yeezys. That's why resale of Yeezys are like a sport.
Yep, right.
Because of how the brand's positioned itself as something you can't find.
Yeah. And it's something that you have to be part of this community to know what's happening, to get the latest information of where to get the latest Yeezys.
Exactly.
I mean,
and that's community marketing,
Yeah, community. Again, there's a guy. Good Lord, don't get me started. There's a guy who wrote a book called The Passion Economy, and he's basically kind of saying that today, if you want to be successful as an individual, all you need to have is 1,000 loyal followers on your social media, and you'll be fine.
Let's say exponential effects.
Not just of the exponential effect of the support. So if you have 1,000 followers following you and they're paying you $50 a month, right? Think about what that means. And then you are releasing presentations like this, or maybe you're teaching people about photography or any of those and they buy your products. You can absolutely, the creators are sustaining themselves and making millions off that model. It's not about being relevant to 1 million people. It's being relevant to a very concentrated group of loyal followers who will fund your passion.
Mpumi, we could talk about this for hours, man, but unfortunately we have now run out of time. So usually before we go, what we like to do is quick takeaways, because people could, I suppose, rewind, but they'd like to get quick bits. So I'll start with you, Tarasai. What do you think are the important takeaways from this conversation?
I think one of the biggest ones is experimenting budgets. I like that one.
Money to learn.
Yes. Experimenting budgets sound awesome. That is one of the best ones. But yes, in agreement, definitely. You know, NGOs are doing impactful work, and the more brands start to be authentic and care and show compassion, then as a brand, you have more resonance and you can build that following and that culture. And then the people start communicating back to you about what they need, and you start tailoring your brand and your brand positioning to the needs of that following. That definitely sums up and I think adds up to what marketers need to start considering for the upcoming future and months.
Mpumi, if you could leave the audience with one thing they need to remember, what would it be?
One thing, good Lord, I've just said 10 things. Now you need to pick me one. Community. I think for me, that's, you know, as Mike Schaefer talks about it, it's the greatest marketing opportunity of our time. The psychology of it comes from the fact that, you know, globally, we're actually experiencing a loneliness pandemic, right? So there's an opportunity for brands to create spaces where people can belong, right? And I think you see some marketers trying to do it, and I think it's the right thing to do. But I think sometimes the mistake is that you create communities to sell, but not to help. So if you're going to create a community as a brand, the goal must be to enrich that community's life, rather than to create a place where you can sell. So I think that's also how we have to be very careful, that the goal for community point of view, you know, is not a sales group, right? It's a community of people that you add value to their lives as they add value to you, and through that relationship, you can create commercial opportunity.
I gotta say, man, I'm impressed. I think that we've had a peek into how things are going to change, future of marketing. It's a lot of disruptive talk, which is great.
Yeah.
And I think that perhaps the traditional marketing strategies need to be parked, and we need to have probably a season of experimentation.
Yeah.
And to catch up, you know.
Yep.
Also on the continent. Mpumi Zondi from Edelman, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure hosting you here. Also, thank you to Teresa Moffat, MD of Gateway Synergy, and from myself, Govan Whittles. It's been a real pleasure hosting you on this IMM Institute's Friday Flash Talk. Please do share this conversation on social media, on LinkedIn. Take the discussion further and continue with engaging with us. We look forward to next time when we'll bring you more insights and trends, and some gold, you know, definitely a few nuggets here about what to do next and what to think about when you're in that next marketing strategy meeting. Thank you so much. See you next time.